YouTube, nothing but a Bible and a bicycle.
This is Babbling On and Babble On, brought to you by Bible and a Bicycle on YouTube.
Strap on your bike helmet, folks, because we're diving into one of the most enduring, emotionally charged, and controversial events in modern history. It's one of those events that I'm old enough to remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when I seen it on the news. The collapse of the World Trade Center buildings on September 11th of 2001, specifically WTC 7. If you've ever fallen into a rabbit hole of YouTube documentaries or late-night forum threads on 9/11, you've probably come across more than a few eyebrow-raising theories. Today, we're taking a ride through those conspiracy theories, keeping an open mind, but also doing what conspiracy theorists often say we should do: follow the evidence. And to help guide our journey, we're going to lean on the 2008 final report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, on the collapse of WTC 7. This report is the closest thing we have to an official autopsy of the building that wasn't even hit by a plane, but somehow crumbled like a sandcastle. So let's unpack the top 5 conspiracy theories people still talk about today, and what the NIST report has to say about them. Number 1, a controlled demolition. The smoking gun? Let's kick off with the big one. The theory that WTC 7 was brought down in a classic controlled demolition. Why? Well, people point to the symmetrical straight-down collapse, the building falling at a near free-fall speed, and alleged sounds of explosions. Toss in some blurry videos, red-circled screenshots, and dramatic music, and you've got a recipe for doubt. Some even go a step further, claiming traces of thermitic material were found in the dust, suggesting the use of military-grade explosives. The presence of iron microspheres has also been cited by demolition theorists, which would cite a demolition. So, what does NIST say? They actually did consider explosive scenarios, even modeling 6 different hypothetical demolition setups with various types of shaped charges. And they found, nope, no signs of an explosive demolition. According to the report, any blast strong enough to bring down a key column would have produced 130 to 40 decibel sound. That's like standing next to a jet engine, and would have been heard for miles and picked up on every video and audio recording. But those recordings? Dead silent when it comes to that kind of bang. As for the thermite stuff, NIST doesn't directly refute those claims in this report, but they emphasize that they found no physical evidence, no residue, no scorch marks, and no consistent damage pattern that would suggest explosives were used. Instead, they chalked the collapse up to fire. Yep, just boring old office fires. According to the report, debris from the North Tower sparked fires that burned uncontrolled for hours due to a failed water supply. Those fires caused a critical interior column number 79, to buckle after thermal expansion compromised its support, leading to a cascading collapse that started from the inside out. Now, if you're still thinking, no way an office fire did all that, you're not alone. but keep listening. 2. The inside job theory. Did they let it happen? Another widespread belief is that the U.S. government either had foreknowledge of the attacks or was involved in orchestrating them, just to justify war in the Middle East. Sort of a modern-day Reichstag fire scenario. The ideal here is that intelligence agencies stood down to allow it all to happen, or maybe even gave it a push. The NIST report? It doesn't get political. It stays in its lane, focusing strictly on engineering and structural failure. There's zero mention of foreknowledge, military motives, or the new Pearl Harbor theory. But it does acknowledge one relevant point. Communication breakdowns on that day were epic. Emergency responders were overwhelmed, command structures were chaotic, and decisions like not fighting the fire in WTC 7 were delayed or unclear. So, while the report steers clear of tinfoil hat territory, it inadvertently highlights just how dysfunctional things were behind the scenes, which, let's be honest, might help explain how people came to believe something fishy was going on. 3. The Pentagon mystery and Flight 93. What about those? Now, let's briefly touch on some related 9/11 theories that didn't involve WTC 7. Some people believed the Pentagon wasn't hit by a plane at all, but by a missile or drone. Others argue that Flight 93 was shot down by the military instead of crashing during a passenger revolt. These aren't covered in the WTC 7 report, so we can't give you a NIST-based breakdown on them. But officially, the Pentagon was struck by American Airline Flight 77, a Boeing 757, and evidence includes plane wreckage, DNA identification of victims, and multiple eyewitnesses. As for Flight 93, the cockpit voice recorder indicates a struggle between passengers and hijackers, ending in the plane's crash in Pennsylvania. Again, no conclusive evidence of a shoot-down. Still, because so many records were classified or redacted for years, it's not surprising that alternative explanations filled the vacuum. 4. Was the WTC 7 collapse unique in history? Short answer, yes. According to NIST, this was the first known instance where the fire alone brought down a tall, steel-framed high-rise. That's not a small claim. They describe it as a fire-induced progressive collapse, where damage from heat slowly ate away at one part of the structure until the entire building essentially just gave up. And if you're wondering, shouldn't that have happened before, like in other major fires? You're not wrong to ask. NIST admits there's a gap in our knowledge of how buildings behave in real-world fires, especially large structures with long-span floor systems. That said, they emphasized this wasn't a sudden, mysterious failure. It was a chain reaction, triggered by the buckling of just one column and aided by design vulnerabilities. 5. The dancing Israelis and anti-Semitic narratives. Unfortunately, no conspiracy buffet would be complete without some deeply problematic theories. One that refuses to die is the claim that Israeli agents or Jewish individuals had advance warning and stayed home that day. This has been completely debunked. The ideal that no Jews died in the towers is flat out false. Hundreds of Jewish people were killed on 9/11, in numbers consistent with their share of the NYC population. The NIST report doesn't touch this topic, probably because it's not an engineering issue, but let's call this theory what it is: anti-Semitic garbage. The truth, the theories, and the space in between. So where does all this leave us? On one hand, the NIST report is impressively detailed. We're talking hundreds of pages, simulations, calculations, and peer-reviewed conclusions that do offer plausible explanations for what happened, especially to WTC 7. They examined blast scenarios, sound signatures, fire behavior, and more. And they reached a sobering conclusion. The building collapsed because of mundane things: bad luck, poor water access, office fires, and architectural quirks. But on the other hand, a lot of questions people have are outside of the scope of this report. Questions like, why were the documents released so late? Or why were the steel remnants hauled away so fast? Or why weren't other buildings with similar fires affected in the same way? Those questions might not be smoking guns, but they're not nothing either. And let's be real. If your answer to every single 9/11 doubt is, trust the government, you probably haven't been paying attention to how governments work. Skepticism is healthy. Blind trust? Not so much. So here's the bottom line. Conspiracy theories flourish where the official story feels incomplete, where trauma and chaos leave us searching for control. But skepticism isn't just about doubting authority. It's also about doubting the videos with dramatic music and no evidence. It's about asking, what do we actually know? And who's providing the answers? So, where does all of this leave us? On the surface, the NIST report is dense, highly technical, and thorough. You can tell a lot of time and computing power went into the models and simulations. It offers a plausible explanation for WTC 7's collapse. Fires ignited by falling debris, which compromised structural elements, leading to a progressive inward collapse. According to their findings, the explosives weren't needed to explain what happened, and they ruled out demolition-style blast signatures based on sound, video, and structural evidence. But does that mean case closed? Well, not exactly. Because here's the thing. Even if the report is comprehensive, that doesn't mean it answers everything. And it definitely doesn't mean we should stop asking questions. A lot of people still wonder why this is the only known instance of a steel-framed high-rise collapsing from office fires. Or why the investigation didn't begin until after the site was cleared and crucial physical evidence, the actual steel from the WTC 7, was gone. And those, I think, are fair questions. There's also the issue of assumptions. Any simulation, no matter how sophisticated, is only as good as the assumptions you feed it. NIST had to make judgment calls about things like fire temperatures, structural conditions, and which columns failed first. Could a different starting assumption produce a different outcome? Possibly. And then there's the broader context. This wasn't just a building collapse. It was part of a day full of confusion, tragedy, misinformation, and panic. So it's not surprising that many people still feel like the official narrative doesn't quite click into place. That doesn't mean we have a grand conspiracy on our hands. But it also doesn't mean we should accept everything at face value. The truth may very well be in the technical details. But it might also be in the gaps, the gray areas, and the questions that still haven't been fully answered. And maybe that's where healthy skepticism really shines. Not in making accusations, but in keeping the conversation going, in staying curious, and in refusing to settle for easy answers just because they're official. All right, let's have a little musical break.
Yo, there was fire in the skyline, smoke in the street. 2 towers down, but wait, what's that heat? WTC 7 dropped without a hit. No plane, no bang, just dust in a pit. Straight down clean like a job pre-wired. Fell in its footprint, symmetry inspired. But NIST said nah, fire took it out. Meanwhile, engineers were full of doubt. 7 seconds, and it's gone. No jet fuel, no siren song. The charts are raised, the truth delayed. But lies don't last, they will decay. Able danger had the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. But lawyers said, stop privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. Well, the race hell, families cried. We could have stopped this, our sons wouldn't have died. A chart went missing, no one's to blame. Another file lost in a bureaucratic game.
Building 7 in the World Trade.
7 seconds, and it's gone. No confession, no smoking gun. Faith in system starts to shake when all the walls begin to break. There's a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. So-called conspiracy, what the world repeats. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. Luke said the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, and we walk in light. Do not fear what they all fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory is ours, the war is won. Expose the dark, but walk in grace. No shadow can outshine His face. Believers rise, we will not dread. We know who reigns, we know what's ahead. We're not here to panic. We're not here to hide. We push in the shadows, but we cling to the gift. The truth will rise like morning light, and what was buried will come to sight. So we expose what's false, we watch and pray, but we're not afraid, because God's already made the way. No confession, no smoking gun. There's a voice in the smoking gun. There is a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. So-called conspiracy, what the world repeats. The truth is not revolved, revolved or erased. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. Do not fear what they all fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. Expose the dark, but walk in grace. No shadow can outshine His face. Believers rise, we will not dread. We know who reigns, we know what's ahead.
Alright, let's shift gears and veer into a lesser traveled path that leads into one of those stories that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Yet it has all the ingredients of a political thriller. Secret intelligence programs, Pentagon lawyers, missed opportunities, and, of course, a whole lot of unanswered questions. The story centers around a lesser-known name in the 9/11 discussion, a U.S. military data mining project called Able Danger. Ever heard of it? Don't worry, you're not alone. Despite its significance, it barely made a ripple in the mainstream conversation. But if you ask former Pennsylvania Congressman Curt Weldon, that's not just a coincidence, it's part of the problem. Let's rewind to the late 90s. According to Weldon, the United States had already begun piecing together a picture of al-Qaeda activity years before the Twin Towers came down. A team working on Able Danger was using cutting-edge data tools to map out terrorist networks. Weldon claims that, in the process, they identified none other than Mohammed Atta. The same Mohammed Atta who would go on to fly American Airlines Flight 11 into the North Tower on September 11, 2001. Let that sink in. According to Weldon, U.S. military intelligence had Atta on its radar in 2000, one entire year before the attacks. And not only him, apparently they had pegged 3 other future hijackers too. Now, if this is true, it's massive. It doesn't just suggest a missed opportunity. It implies an entire intelligence failure that might have stopped 9/11 in its tracks. So what happened? According to Weldon, the Able Danger team wanted to pass this intelligence to the FBI so it could investigate these individuals. But Pentagon lawyers reportedly stopped them. Why? They were worried about violating privacy laws that protect U.S. citizens and legal foreign residents. Mohammed Atta, at the time, was in the country legally. So, even though they were looking at someone with clear links to al-Qaeda, the plug was pulled on sharing the information. Weldon didn't mince words. He called it a weak excuse. In his mind, these were red flags the size of skyscrapers, ignored because of bureaucratic paralysis. And the frustration didn't stop there. You might think that when the 9/11 Commission was formed, tasked with figuring out how such a monumental intelligence breakdown could happen, Able Danger's findings would be front and center. But they weren't. In fact, they didn't even make it into the final report. This, according to Weldon, is when things went from tragic to infuriating. He says he personally delivered a chart, a now infamous chart, laying out Able Danger's findings to the then Deputy National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley, shortly after the attacks. This chart reportedly shows Atta and his network before 9/11. According to a White House spokesperson, Hadley remembered seeing the chart. Sort of. He couldn't say when or where, and the National Security Council couldn't find any trace of it. Poof. Gone. To Weldon, this was more than a misplaced document. It was a symptom of a larger issue. Willful ignorance, or at best, gross negligence. Now, let's be fair. The 9/11 Commission didn't completely ignore Able Danger. They did meet with a Navy officer just 10 days before the report's release, who claimed that the operation had flagged Atta, but the staff decided the information wasn't credible or consistent enough to delay or revise the report. So, essentially, thanks for the info, but we're moving ahead anyway. That decision didn't set well with Weldon, or with several military officers involved in Able Danger, who later came forward to say, yes, this program existed, and yes, it did identify Atta. 5 members of the team claimed they saw the chart. But the 9/11 Commission stuck to its guns. They didn't find it reliable, they didn't think it was historically significant, and they didn't think it warranted further investigation. Sounds tidy, maybe a little too tidy. Even former New Jersey Governor Thomas Keene, who chaired the commission, got some side-eye for his handling of the issue. Instead of demanding an investigation into the actual claims, he called for the Pentagon to look into the credibility of the officers making them. Classic misdirection play. Don't examine the message, question the messenger. And as you can imagine, that went over like a lead balloon with the families of 9/11 victims. Diane Horning, whose son Matthew was killed in the Twin Towers, didn't mince words. She said she was angry because if this intelligence had been shared, her son's death might have been preventable. Another family member, Mindy Kleinberg, went further. If this one piece of information could be brushed off so easily, what else might have been overlooked? Good question. And they weren't the only ones asking. Senator Arlene Specter, then the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, held a hearing and said, if Atta and other 9/11 terrorists were identified before the attacks, it would be a very serious breach not to have that information passed along. Weldon agreed and pressed hard for a renewed investigation, but the issue got tangled up in partisanship, bureaucracy, and a general sense of, move along, nothing to see here. Now let's pause for a second and take a breath. What do we make of all this? Well, like most government-related stories that involve acronyms, cover-ups, and committee hearings, it's complicated. Was Abel Danger 100% accurate in identifying Atta? It's hard to say. Intelligence work is murky, leads are messy, data can be misleading, and hindsight is always 20/20. The commission argued that the information didn't fit the broader picture they were building at the time, and that's not an entirely unreasonable position. But brushing off such serious claims within 10 days of hearing them, that feels rushed, especially when multiple officers corroborate the story, especially when the families of the victims are still demanding answers, especially when a former prosecutor like Specter says, hey, maybe we should look into this. And let's not forget, the stakes here aren't minor. We're not talking about some bureaucratic snafu over budget numbers. We're talking about the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. We're talking about an attack that reshaped American foreign policy, civil liberties, and military operations for decades to come. If there was any chance the government had actionable intelligence on the hijackers beforehand and dropped the ball, shouldn't that be the subject of thorough, transparent investigation? And yet here we are, over 2 decades later, still asking, still wondering what might have been on that missing chart, still trying to make sense of who knew what and when. Maybe Abel Danger really was too thin to rely on. Maybe it got lost in the noise. Or maybe it was just too inconvenient to acknowledge at the time. Whatever the case, here's what we can say for sure. In a world full of conspiracy theories and misinformation, this one isn't built on YouTube videos or hearsay. It's built on official memos, sworn statements, and the testimonies of decorated military officers. It deserves better than a footnote. So as we wrap up this here little discussion about the Abel Danger, let's not pretend we have all the answers. We don't. But we can keep asking questions. We can keep demanding transparency. Because democracy, at its core, isn't about having perfect government. It's about holding power accountable when it's imperfect. And if Kurt Weldon and the Abel Danger team were even partially right, then we've got some unfinished business. And that's worth remembering.
Hey, real quick. Big thanks to everyone out there listening to Babbling On in Babylon, brought to you by Bible and a Bicycle. It seriously means a lot that you're here. If you're enjoying the podcast, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and maybe share it with a friend who'd get something out of it too. It helps way more than you might think. And if you want to support the show in a bigger way, check out the links in the description. There's merch, memberships, and other ways to help keep this thing rolling. So, thanks for riding with me. Let's keep it going.
Yo, there was fire in the skyline, smoking a straight 2 towers down, but wait, what's that heat? WTC 7, drop it out as hit. No plane, no bang, just dust in a pit. Straight down clean like a job pre-wired, filling its footprint, symmetry inspired. But NIST said no, fire took it out. Meanwhile, engineers were full of doubt. 7 seconds and it's gone. No jet fuel, no siren song. The tracks erased, the truth delayed. But lives don't last, they will decay. Danger had the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. But lawyers said stop, privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. Will the raise hell, families cried. We could've stopped this, our sons wouldn't have died. A chart went missing, no one's to blame. Another file lost in a bureaucrat game. Nothing, seconds and it's gone. No confession, no smoking gun. And the system starts to shake when all the walls begin to break. There's a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. A co-conspiracy, what the world repeats. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. And looks at the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, and we walk in light. Do not fear what they all fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed, and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. Danger had the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. The lawyer said stop, privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. Will the raise hell, families cry. What was buried will come to sight. So we expose what's false, we watch and pray. But we're not afraid, because God's already made the way. We're not here to panic, we're not here to drift. We question the shadows, but we cling to the gift. The truth will rise like morning light, and what was buried will come to sight. So we expose what's false, we watch and pray. But we're not afraid, because God's already made the way.
Now, most people can tell you what happened to the Twin Towers on that terrible day. 2 planes hit, both towers fell. The WTC-7? That's the lesser-known cousin in the background of the family photo. It quietly collapsed at 5:20 p.m. that afternoon, hours after the main attacks. And many Americans still don't even know a 3rd skyscraper went down that day. So, what happened to WTC-7? And why are we still talking about it more than 2 decades later? Well, it's simple. A lot of people think the official explanation just doesn't add up. Let's back up. WTC-7 was a 47-story steel-framed skyscraper located just north of the Twin Towers. It housed offices for the Secret Service, IRS, SEC, and other federal agencies. On the morning of 9/11 of 2001, it was damaged by debris when the North Tower collapsed. Fires broke out on several floors. No one debates that. But then, hours later, the entire building came down. Not partially, not in a slow, fire-weakened crumble. It dropped like a rock, straight down into its own footprint, in under 7 seconds. Now, this wouldn't be so weird if WTC-7 had been hit by a plane, or if massive explosions had visibly ripped through it. But neither of those things happened. Instead, the official story, put forward by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST again, is that normal office fires, started by debris and left unchecked due to sprinkler failure, caused a steel girder on floor 13 to expand from heat, dislodge from its seat, and started chain reaction of column failures that brought down the entire building. So fire. Just fire. No explosives, no special structural flaws, just good old-fashioned heat. And a lot of people, engineers, architects, and regular folks alike, have never bought that. Enter the University of Alaska Fairbanks. In 2020, a 4-year independent study led by Dr. J. Leroy Halsey and his team at UAF published a final report that took a very close look at what might have caused the collapse of WTC-7. Their study was methodical, their tone was professional, and their conclusion? Well, let me just quote them directly. Quote, "Fire did not cause the collapse of WTC-7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST." Unquote. Boom! Let that hang in the air for a second. The UAF study didn't just point fingers, they got into the weeds. They ran simulations, they recreated the building structure, they examined what kind of local failures, like columns buckling or beams failing, could lead to a total collapse like what we saw that day. They even modeled the exact failure sequence proposed by NIST. And guess what? According to UAF's models, NIST's explanation didn't hold up. The supposed thermal expansion on floor 13, the beam couldn't have expanded enough to walk off its seat. And even if it did, UAF says it wouldn't have caused the rest of the building to collapse in the manner that was observed. Here's the key point. The UAF study found that the actual collapse would have required near simultaneous failure of every column in the building, something fires just don't do. That's right, not a slow progressive collapse. Not one floor pancaking onto the next. A global failure. All columns gone at once. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear all columns failed at once, I don't picture office fires. I picture a controlled demolition. To be clear, the UAF report doesn't say that. They don't speculate on what did cause the collapse. They just say what didn't. Their job was to test hypotheses, not accuse anyone. But the implications are hard to ignore. If it wasn't fire, then what was it? Here's where things get murky. Because when you question the official story, people tend to slap you with the conspiracy theorist label. But let's pause and remember, skepticism is not the same as paranoia. When a 47-story building falls in a way that looks exactly like a controlled demolition, and 2 decades later, independent studies challenge the government's own explanation, we should at least be willing to ask some tough questions. Now, let's zoom out for a second. Remember what NIST said? WT7 was the first steel skyscraper in history to collapse from fire. That alone should have raised eyebrows. In fact, it still baffles engineers around the world. There are examples of buildings that burn hotter and longer, some with raging fires over multiple floors, and they didn't fall. So, either WTC7 was a unicorn of bad design, or there's more to the story. But instead of a thorough public debate, we got a pretty narrow narrative. Don't worry, folks. Fire did it. And for years, that's been the end of it. But now we have a peer-reviewed engineering study saying, actually, that explanation doesn't hold up underneath scrutiny. And it's not just UAF. Thousands of architects and engineers have signed petitions calling for a new investigation. They're not fringe YouTubers. These are licensed professionals putting their reputations on the line. And yet, silence from the mainstream. Why? Maybe because changing the official story now would be messy. Maybe because it opens a whole can of worms nobody wants to touch. If WTC-7 didn't fall because of fire, and it wasn't hit by a plane, then somebody made it fall. And that leads to some very uncomfortable possibilities. I'm not here to tell you who did what. That's above my knowledge and pay grade. But I am here to say this. If the UAF study is right, and the collapse required all the columns to fail at once, then we should be demanding answers. Not for clicks, not for drama, but for the sake of truth. Think about it. If this building collapsed due to something other than fire, and that fact has been hidden or brushed aside, that's not just a mistake. That's a scandal. And that's a conspiracy, not a theory. And it doesn't mean we throw out all of history. It doesn't mean every explanation is fake, or that everything that happened on 9/11 was an inside job. What it means is that we still don't have the full picture, and we owe it to the victims, the families, and to ourselves to find it. Maybe the truth is still out there, buried under years of bureaucracy and red tape. Or maybe it's just inconvenient. But we're not crazy for wanting to know what really happened to WTC-7. So here we are, over 20 years later. One building, one unexplained collapse, one bold study saying, nope, that doesn't check out. And a whole lot of people still wondering why the world's most advanced intelligence and engineering agencies got it wrong. Or worse, maybe didn't want to get it right. It's not about paranoia. It's about accountability. It's about evidence. It's about not letting inconvenient facts get swept under a rug just because they challenge the narrative. So if you've never heard of WTC-7, now you have. If you've never heard of the UAF report, now you know. And for those of you listening here on YouTube, there'll be links down below. And if you're starting to ask, why didn't I know this before? You're not alone. We don't need all the answers today, but we do need the courage to keep asking the questions.
Yo, there was fire in the skyline, smoke in the street. 2 towers down, but wait, what's that heat? WTC 7 dropped without a hit. No plane, no bang, just dust in a pit. Straight down, clean like a job pre-wired. Fell in its footprint, symmetry inspired. But NIST said nah, fire took it out. Meanwhile, engineers were full of doubt. 7 seconds and it's gone. No jet fuel, no siren song. The charts are raised, the truth delayed. The lies don't last, they will decay. But danger had the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. The lawyers said, stop privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. World erased hell, families cried. We could have stopped this, our sons wouldn't have died. A job went missing, no one's to blame. Another file lost in a bureaucratic game. 7 seconds and it's gone. No jet fuel, no siren song. The charts are raised, the truth delayed. The lies don't last, they will decay. They will danger, have the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. The lawyers said stop privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. Melbourne raised hell, families cried. We could have stopped this, our sons wouldn't have died. A chart went missing, no one's to blame. Another file lost in a bureaucratic game. 7 seconds and it's gone. No confession, no smoking gun. Faith in system starts to shake when all the walls begin to break. There's a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. Don't call conspiracy what the world repeats. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. Luke said the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, we walk in light. Do not fear what they all fear. God's not absent, he is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. Expose the dark, but walk in grace. No shadow can outshine his face. Believers rise, we will not dread. We know who reigns, we know what's ahead. We're not here to panic, we're not here to drift. We question the shadows, but we cling to the gift. The truth will rise like morning light, and what was buried will come to sight. So we expose what's false, we watch and pray, but we're not afraid, because God's already made the way.
So here we are, at the end of a long and winding road. A road that's taken us from the dramatic collapse of WTC 7 through questions of controlled demolition, intelligence failures like Able Danger, and even into the realm of independent scientific studies that push back hard on the official narrative. And after all that, maybe the biggest takeaway isn't that we have a simple answer, but that we still don't. Look, no one wants to believe that our government could miss obvious warning signs, suppress key intelligence, or possibly even mislead the public. But the truth is, history's full of examples where exactly that happened. Whether it was Vietnam, Watergate, the Church Committee hearings, or even more recent revelations about mass surveillance and whistleblowers. Trust in official stories has taken enough hits that skepticism isn't just understandable, it's healthy. Let's be honest, there's something deeply unsettling about the ideal that a 47-story skyscraper, WTC 7, collapsed into a pile of dust without being hit by a plane. And yet, most Americans still don't know it even happened. That alone should give us pause. Then there's Able Danger, a data mining program that may have flagged hijackers like Mohammed Atta a full year before the attacks. What happened to that information? Why wasn't it shared? Why did the 9/11 Commission barely mention it, if at all, before dismissing it as not historically significant? And what about the University of Alaska Fairbanks study? a 4-year computer-modeled analysis that says fire didn't cause WTC 7 to fall. Why is that conclusion not front-page news? Why are we still pretending the debate is settled? It's tempting to tie it all up in a bow, to say, this was clearly an inside job, or all these conspiracy theories are just noise. But real life isn't that clean. Sometimes truth gets buried under bureaucracy. Sometimes it's twisted by political agendas. And sometimes, as I've said before, it's just inconvenient. So if we're being honest with ourselves and with history, we've got to leave the door open. Maybe WTC 7 was a tragic anomaly, or maybe it was something more. Maybe Abel Danger was a dropped ball, or maybe someone didn't want the game played at all. We don't have to jump to conclusions, but we also don't have to accept unsatisfying ones. And really, that's what this podcast has been about. Not proving a grand theory, but just pausing for a second, looking back at the official story and asking, are we really sure? But if the answer is not entirely, then we owe it to ourselves and to the people who died that day to keep asking, keep investigating, keep holding power accountable. And most importantly, keep remembering that truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth pursuing. We've looked at the official narrative and the cracks in its foundations. We've explored alternate theories, some with compelling evidence, others with more smoke than fire. We've heard from intelligence officers, engineers, grieving families, and even a team of researchers in Alaska who concluded, flat out, that fire did not bring down WTC 7. And yet, after all that, there's still no single answer that satisfies everyone. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe what matters most isn't having all the answers, but being willing to ask the right questions. Now, before we close this out, let's take a moment to zoom out. Not from the buildings or the data or the politics, but from the entire worldview that surrounds this kind of topic. In Isaiah 8:12, God gives us instruction. Do not call conspiracy everything this people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. It's a powerful verse, and a timely one. Because let's be honest, when we talk about events like 9/11 and the things that might have been hidden or mishandled, it's easy to spiral into fear. Fear of what we don't know. Fear of what might be true. Fear of powerful systems that may not have our best interest in mind. And yes, sometimes fear drives people into believing every shadow hides a plot. Everything becomes a conspiracy. Every unanswered question becomes a confirmation of the worst-case scenario. But Isaiah reminds us to take a breath. Not everything labeled a conspiracy is one. And not everything denied by the powerful is innocent either. The real wisdom comes in discernment, not being swept away by popular fear, but also not blindly trusting any narrative just because it's official. In other words, think critically. Think for yourself. Think based on the evidence. But for the love of God, please, think. And pray for clarity. Don't fear what the world fears. But don't ignore the truth when it comes knocking. And the truth? Well, the truth has a way of enduring. Long after the press conferences are over, long after the reports are sealed and the stories move on, truth stays. Sometimes buried, sometimes whispered, but always waiting for someone to look again. Maybe that's where we're at with WTC 7. Maybe that's where we're at with Able Danger. With the 9/11 Commission's blind spots, with charts that disappeared, and witnesses who were never interviewed. We don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to say, that doesn't sit right. And we don't need to be naive to say, maybe there's more to this story. What we need is courage, and curiosity, and yes, faith. Faith that truth matters even when it's uncomfortable. Faith that God sees what we don't. Faith that justice may be delayed, but it's never forgotten in His eyes. And so, as we close out this journey and this podcast, let Isaiah's words echo in our hearts. Don't fear what they fear. Don't call everything a conspiracy. Don't fall into panic. But also, don't look away when something deserves a second look. Keep asking questions, my friends, my family. Stay grounded. Stay bold. And remember, God hasn't called us to fear the world, but to walk in truth, even when the path is unclear. So thanks for sticking with me through this. Whether you're skeptical, curious, or somewhere in between, just know this conversation isn't over. Not by a long shot. Because sometimes the only way forward is to go back and take a second look. Thanks for joining me here today on this episode of Babbling On in Babylon. Look forward to hearing from you, some fellowship, those comments down below. For those of you over here on YouTube, big shout out and thank you, everyone listening. Till next time, shalom, shalom.
There was fire in the skyline, smoke in the street, 2 towers down, but wait, what's that heat? WTC 7 dropped without a hit. No plane, no bang, just dust in a pit. Straight down clean like a jaw pre-wired. Fell in its footprints and the tree inspired. But NIST said nah, fire took it out. Meanwhile, engineers were full of doubt. 7 seconds and it's gone. No jet fuel, no siren song. The treasure race, the truth delayed. But lies don't last, they will decay. Able Danger had the names, the signs, the faces. Track the movements, map the traces. But lawyer says stop, privacy rights. While hijackers flew into the lights. Welcome race hell, families cried. We could've stopped this, our sons wouldn't have died. A chart went missing, no one's to blame. Another file lost in a bureaucratic game. 7 seconds, and it's gone. No confession, no smoking gun. Fake the system starts to shake when all the walls begin to break. There's a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. Don't call conspiracy what the world repeats. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. And Luke said the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, and we walk in light. Do not fear what they don't fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. No shadow can outshine we're not here to drift. We question the shadows, but we cling to the gift. The truth will rise like morning light, and what was buried will come to sight. So we expose what's false, we watch and pray, but we're not afraid, because God's already made the way. And Luke said the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, and we walk in light. Do not fear, without fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. There's a voice in the noise that cuts through the haze. Not with fear, not with rage, but a holy blaze. Don't call conspiracy what the world repeats. The truth is not hiding in the government seats. And Luke said the dark will meet the dawn. What's hidden now will soon be gone. We don't need fear to understand the fight. We've got the word, and we walk in light. Do not hear what they all fear. God's not absent, He is near. The end is written, sealed and done. The victory's ours, the war is won. No shadow can outshine His face. Believers rise, we will not dread. We know who reigns, we know what's ahead.